What's up, everybody? Mike Walsh here. So today I have for you my assessment of the judging of Islam Machachev versus Ian Garry. Okay, this is from a lot of popular demand for some reason. But yes, I'm going to do it for you. I'm going to break it down. I'm going to read through the judging criteria, and I'm going to make the case that, yes, Islam Machachev was indeed the rightful winner. All right, I'm only going to be looking at round 5 because Islam clearly wins rounds 1 and 2. Garry clearly wins round 3. Round 4 is close, but should go to Garry. And round 5 is the one that would settle it, right? That's the tiebreaker round. And it's the one that is most egregious, I would say, to argue should have gone to Garry amongst the rounds people are arguing. So that's going to be the focus of the vid. It's just round 5. This video is taking as a given that Islam won rounds 1 and 2, and Garry won rounds 3 and 4. Now, people got mad at me because of my initial reaction video, like the next morning after the fight. I said that Islam won, and I said that round 3 goes to Garry, and that round 4 is close, but probably went to Islam, and people just blew up over that and got really mad. I had watched the fight once up to that point. I watched it with someone, so I was a little distracted. And, I didn't think it mattered because whether you give Garry round 4 or not, he still loses because he loses rounds 1, 2, and 5. So I didn't care. But yeah, people got really, really took umbrage over that. And yes, I'll tell you, I have rewatched the fight. And yeah, round 4 can go to Garry. I don't fucking care. It's that's fine. Again, this video is treating it as a given that round 5 is the tiebreaker round. That the guy who wins round 5 wins the fight. Okay? That's the given going in. Now, this is also not a video that is a direct response to any other one specific YouTuber. Okay? I have not watched any other YouTubers' videos about this topic. Okay? I know, they're showing up in my feed and people are mentioning them in my comments, but I haven't watched any videos where person X or Y makes the case that Garry should have won, okay? That's not the research I did, for this video. It's not like seeing oh, well, what's their argument? And I'm not specifically responding to any one person. What I did instead was rewatch the fight, rewatch round 5, take notes, and read the fucking judging criteria and form my own conclusions, which I'm going to present to you here, okay? So that's how this is going to work, and that's the intention behind this video. I'm not trying to make, YouTube drama by beefing with somebody or, needlessly unpacking all of their arguments so that I can then make my own. I'm just giving you how I interpret the judging criteria and how I would judge round 5 based on that. And I just gotta say, the biggest risk of creating drama here in this video will just be this comment of mine that I kind of suspect that if you are a content creator and you are aggressively arguing that Ian Garry should have won this fight, I suspect you're doing that just for clicks. I suspect you're doing that just to create controversy and get attention and not because you actually believe that. I could be wrong, but that is my suspicion. And I would say that if you do sincerely believe that Garry should have won, that he won round 5, if that's your belief, then that should be the least of the outrages. What you should actually be outraged about is how insane the judging criteria therefore must be. Because if you're going to read the judging criteria to suggest that yes, Garry should have won that round, then we've got an emergency here. This needs immediate changing because that's an insane way to judge an MMA fight. And I'm going to explain exactly why when we get into the nitty gritty about what the criteria says. But yeah, if it's your sincere belief that Garry should have been given the nod based on the criteria, then what you should be really screaming to high heavens about is that we need to change the fucking judging criteria. Okay, and I've not heard that or seen that in my feed. So I'm suspicious that people actually believe this versus are just, being lawyers about it and advocating a case, whether it's true or not. You know, that's kind of my read. Again, I haven't actually watched anyone's videos because I won't be rage baited in that way. I got better things to do with my time. But, you know, people have been requesting my video and I'm here to deliver it. So I'm going to, before I actually get into the like criteria, I'm going to say as well that I'm in favor of more damage and fight finishing, like centric scoring. Okay, don't get it twisted. I don't want like just control time to be scored for a shitload of points or anything. That's not what I like. That's not even how I came up watching the sport. I began as a Pride FC fan. I started watching the sport in 2005, and there were many, many things I liked about Pride FC, but one of them was that their judging criteria focused on damage and like the effort to finish the fight. It wasn't the only thing, those weren't the only things scored, but they were like the chief things being scored. And that was cool. I liked that. You know, I didn't like watching someone get like touched up on the feet and then take someone down and just sit in their guard and do literally fucking nothing and just have top position and win the round because of it. You know, I don't like seeing that shit. Now, in the case of Pride FC, it could sometimes get a little weird with how they would do it. So, for example, Nogueira beat Rico Rodriguez, who was a former UFC heavyweight champion. And it's been a minute since I've watched that fight, but my recollection is that it's 20 minutes. I think it's the full like 10 first-minute round and 2 additional 5-minute rounds. And the fight is basically just Rodriguez taking Nogueira down and sitting in his guard. And it's very boring. There's like Nogueira has no ability to get up, and there's hardly any strikes thrown. There's not much ground and pound or anything from Rodriguez. So it's mostly just Nogueira getting taken down and held down in guard. But Nogueira, on a couple of occasions, went for some submission attempts that were like kind of close, but not really. You know, like a triangle attempt that's kind of on. He is locking his legs together in a figure 4, and he's looking for it. You know, never actually gets that close to finishing Rodriguez, but they are like submission attempts. You know, don't quote me that I'm going from memory. I haven't seen that fight in years. But it was controversial, and it was a split decision, and it went to Nogueira because despite the fact he got taken down and held down for like the whole fucking fight, he did try a couple of submissions that were close enough to count as like attempting to finish the fight. So boom, he won. I'm not 100% sure that's how it should be. I'm not wholly against it either because, yeah, like just taking the guy down and sitting in his guard shouldn't count for fucking much either. But, you know, I'm just saying that that's like an example where something that sounds really good in theory can lead to some kind of weird decisions. But regardless, circling back, like I'm in favor of scoring in the unified rules, like scoring in the UFC, that, yeah, focuses on things like damage and domination and not merely like control time and not merely like I don't want fights to be conducted in such a way where someone just gets to what's like only nominally an advantage, you know, like holding someone against the fence or something like that. If that's all you're doing, if you're just wall installing, I don't want that to score for hardly anything. Okay, don't get it twisted. But what happens in round 5 should score for more than that on Islam's behalf. And I'm going to argue that per the actual written criteria, it indeed does. Okay, so that's all that out of the way. Now let's get into it here. I'm going to first read you my notes on the fight as far as everything that fucking happens of consequence. And then I'm going to read the judging criteria. And you'll be able to see on screen. You know, I'm going to, you know, do some screen capture and allow you to read along with me the judging criteria as I go. But first, I'm just going to read from my notes here. I'm trying to be restrained as far as like showing fight footage. I don't want this video to get flagged or nothing. But I'm just going to read you like everything relevant that happens in this fight. Now, I'm listing the time during the round each of these things happen. I'm going per like the on-screen clock, the countdown clock. So if I say, for example, 4 minutes, 48 seconds, I don't mean with 12 seconds left in the round, I mean with 12 seconds only then having been elapsed, okay? It's the actual on-screen clock is what I'm going by here. So, at 4 minutes, 48 seconds, there's a body kick by Garry. And from what I could see on my television, and I did like rewind it multiple times, it's kind of unclear if Islam blocks it. Like his elbows are kind of down, and it's like not totally clear if it partly gets blocked and goes across the elbow and forearm, or if it gets just underneath it. Not super clear to me. But a body kick by Garry. A right hand from Garry as Islam is stepping out, and then Islam kind of gets hit by it and rolls to clear. It connects, but there's no real reaction from Islam. Islam is not like dazed or like, oh shit, you know, his head doesn't get snapped back. It doesn't like cut him or anything. It doesn't wobble him. It connects. It's a scoring right hand. Don't get me wrong. There's that. That's Garry's best strike of the whole round, by the way. Next, and that was at 4 minutes, 17 seconds. At 4 minutes, 3 seconds, Garry lands a cross to the body as Islam is moving away from it. Islam is like skirting back as the cross connects. At 3 minutes, 52 seconds, a right hand from Garry connects. Islam is pulling away and going to parry, and he just doesn't quite get out of the way in time, and the right hand touches him. You know, Islam is moving with it and doesn't react in any way as if it hurt him at all. You know, it connects. It's a scoring strike. It should be ticked. You know, you know, if you're keeping track of every significant strike landed, you should count that one. But that's all that happens. At 3:41, Garry lands an oblique kick. It doesn't, from what you can see on camera, it doesn't get some big reaction. It doesn't jar Islam's knee. You know, it's not like when John Jones kicked Rampage and it's you see the hyperextension and Rampage go like, what the fuck, dude? You know, none of that happens. At 3 minutes and 30 seconds, Garry lands another body kick. By body kick, I mean round kick. This one clearly connects. The first one I said it was hard to tell if Islam partly blocked it or not. This one does pretty visibly go under his arms, but there's no reaction. Islam doesn't get hit by it and take a big breath or something, or wince as if his body is tightening up or anything like that. He doesn't react the way like Merab Dvalishvili does when Peter Yan kicks him in their rematch. Islam just gets hit by it and keeps going, okay? So that's it. That's pretty much it. Like those are the only strikes of note that clearly connected. Islam goes for like a 1-1-2 that all misses, all comes up short. Garry kind of skirts away as it's happening. And that's like most of what Islam attempted on the feet. And then he takes Garry down, and there is over half a round worth of Islam Machachev keeping Ian Garry in the body triangle. Okay, over half a round is that. And all the shit on the feet is the shit I just said. All right? Now, on the ground, there is some like pitter-patter punching. Garry at points tries to punch back. Islam, towards the end, starts trying to land some shit, land some hammer fists. And some of them kind of connect. You know, they're all being partly blocked, or they're hitting like unideal parts of the head. They're not like hitting them right on the button. They're not hitting Garry right there. And some of them, you know, are just arm punches. You know, he does get a couple of bigger, you know, getting his torso into it strikes. None of them, I think, are listed on like the UFC stats or /fight metric page as significant strikes from either guy. They're insignificant strikes. But that happens. I don't think those would score for much. They do technically happen. Like he does hit Garry on the ground. It's a real thing. And Garry tries to hit him back. But, you know, of which, if that were all you were looking at, you would favor Islam in that case. You know, the punches he lands on the ground are better. They're not great, but they're better than the punches Ian Garry lands. But those are not of meaningful consequence here. Okay? What is of consequence, though, are these things I'm going to timestamp here, where Islam is clearly trying to set up the choke. All right, at 1 minute, 52 seconds, you can see twice Islam reach across his face / under the chin before Garry grabs the wrist. So that's Islam doing this trying to set up the choke, and Garry defending. Garry grabbing the wrist and keeping it off. At 1 minute 13 seconds, Garry tries to punch back, and Islam takes that opportunity to again try to do that, and Garry has to go back to defending. At 25 seconds, a similar thing happens, and then it's with like 10 seconds left that Islam starts, trying to land bigger stuff in the hammer fist, and then he ends by going for that head and arm hold. Okay, he doesn't have a full-on arm triangle, a full-on katagatami, but he's got the head and arm hold to then like start going for it. Should he have had the time, because then the buzzer goes. That's it. That's the whole round. That's everything that happens. Yes, Ian Garry landed more damage. Okay, because Islam gets the better of the pitter-patter ground and pound that happens, but yeah, that should weigh less than the actual like right hands and body kicks that Garry connects with, and the one oblique kick. But Garry, like, whilst that's accurate to say, it's accurate to say that Garry did more damage in terms of strikes in round 5. It would also be very accurate to say that Garry did almost no damage. Because again, I listed for you what happened. Nothing caused visible damage to Islam's face from what I could tell. That damage was pre-existing going into that round. Nothing like wobbled him. Nothing got some big reaction where he got hit. It was just like, oh, fuck. His eyes lit up, his head snapped back. None of that happened. He never looked like he was on Bambi legs. He never like winced from a body strike or took a big puff of breath like, oh, after a body shot. The oblique kick didn't seem to do anything. It didn't jar his knee and damage the joint from what I could tell. That's hardly any damage at all. Okay, it's more damage in terms of strikes than Islam did, but that's sort of like saying that, like me right now being bone dry, if I took a drop of water and put it on my hand, I'd be more wet than I was before, yes, but it would not be very meaningful to say that I am wet, right? Like, Garry did more damage than Islam. That is true in the way that that drop of water makes me more wet than I was before. But just as I'm not very meaningfully wet after that drop of water hits my skin, Garry did not like meaningfully damage Islam. Hardly at all. Not that that doesn't score, don't get me wrong. If that's literally all that happened, if all that happened in the fight were the strikes, and then none of the ground shit happened, and they just danced around for 4 minutes, then Garry would win, because that would be more damage, right? Like it's discernible that he did more damage. But I'm just making it clear that he did a very, 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 very minuscule amount of damage, and that will matter when we discuss the grappling. Okay? So that's the bases laid here, and now I'm going to show you the judging criteria. All right, so you guys should be seeing in front of you right now my webpage here, and I've got in front of me, yes, the California State Athletic Commission Mixed Martial Arts Officials Guide here, and this is updated. This includes the clarification that got published where they like really doubled down and said like, no, this is supposed to be damage centric. So the stuff that everyone's making a hubbub about is included here, and that's going to be chiefly what we read from. Let me scroll down here. I might return to a quick earlier portion where they talk about scoring and damage and dominance and whatnot. But no, we're going to be chiefly focused on this part right here, as you can see. MMA bout scoring, judging criteria clarification. All right? So, I'm going to read what they're supposed to do. Fighter effectiveness concepts. Judges will evaluate the relative effectiveness of each fighter in each round using the following 3 prioritized and interrelated constructs. Okay, so a thing to note right away. It says right here, 3 prioritized and interrelated constructs. It does not say that only one of these matters. It does not say that you only like value the other two if the first being damaged. They only value the other two if the first is a tie. Okay? Because I'm going to skip ahead real quick, but there's a section down here where they talk about shit like aggressiveness and ring control and stuff like that, or cage control, fight area control. And yes, they say here, the effectiveness of each fighter's successful striking and grappling, as defined above, will be the determining factor in the scoring of a vast majority of rounds. However, if a judge absolutely cannot determine even a marginal advantage in either, the judge will defer either to aggressiveness or fighting area control, whichever impacted the round in a more significant manner. So that's saying that, like, yes, if there's no way to discern in terms of the three main things which are prioritized, which are damage, dominance, and duration, the 3Ds, if there's no advantage, like when looking at those, not even a marginal one, then yes, you then defer to aggressiveness and fight area control. There's no language like that that says that of the 3Ds, damage, dominance, and duration, that you only look at damage, and then like only if damage is 100% equal and you can't even distinguish a marginal advantage to one dude or the other in that department, that you then consider duration and dominance. Okay? Now, I'm going to read, though, like damage is still the most important, and damage relates to the other two, but not in such a way, again, where you merely look at damage, and so long as there's any discernible ability to say that person X did more damage than person Y, no matter how marginal, that we don't then also look at dominance and duration. Okay? That's what you're supposed to do with damage, dominance, and duration in relation to then fight area control and aggression. Again, you're only supposed to care about fight area control and aggression if the 3Ds are a virtual tie, where you can't discern even a marginal advantage, but that's not how the 3Ds themselves work in relation to each other. As you can see, again, where I highlighted here, the 3Ds are three prioritized and interrelated constructs. All right? So that's that. Going forward. Damage is defined as legal fighting techniques, the results of which lessen an opponent's capacity and or will to compete. Now I'm going to highlight will to compete here. That's not of like major consequence in this bout specifically, but that connects to the old language. Let me scroll back here. So, in the old pre-clarification criteria here, there is language that's in this paragraph. Let me find it real quick. All right, pardon the little cut in the editing here. I couldn't find this little paragraph. But yes, in the original pre-clarification criteria, in the section on damage, there's language here that damage shall also be assessed when a fighter's actions using striking or grappling lead to a diminishment of their opponent's energy, confidence, abilities, and spirit. All right, and again, there was similar language in the clarification about the opponent's will to fight. And again, that doesn't have much meaning for this round 5 between Islam and Garry, but that matters as far as other fights. So like think of a Merab Dvalishvili fight. Like this argument I first heard made by Luke Thomas, actually when there was debate about whether Mateusz Gamrot should have beaten Arman Tsarukyan. But this applies a lot to Merab fights specifically, where Merab doesn't do a lot of damage in terms of like landing strikes, and he's not like slamming people on the floor with his takedowns typically. He's not typically, landing tons of ground and pound. He's not typically getting very frequent submission attempts. He's doing lots of rinse and repeat sort of takedowns and control grappling. And, some people have pointed out that it's a little weird that he wins some of these rounds or some of these fights, or that these ones that he wins maybe are closer than people realize. However, if you listen to this language, that's the argument for Merab winning those kinds of fights. The arguments for him beating people like Umar Nurmagomedov is that you can see from the pace that he is like affecting his opponent's confidence, energy, and and spirit, will to fight. He is diminishing their competitiveness by like outworking and mogging them the whole fucking time. Like, so that's in here, right? And that's sort of supported again by that language in the clarification. Hold on one moment. You can't see the coffee cup, but it's happening. All right. So that's that. Again, not a big thing for this fight, but I just wanted to touch on that. All right, back down here. As you can see, we're back to the clarification with damage here. Again, lessens an opponent's capacity and or will to compete, right? So someone like Merab is still scoring in that sense. All right. Damage includes knockdowns, which is forcing the opponent to the canvas as a result of legal detrimental strikes. Simple enough. Heavy and or concussive legal strikes to vital targets. Legal strikes that force an opponent to retreat / readjust or default to defense exclusively. So yeah, heavy concussive strikes, obvious enough. That making them readjust and defend, simple enough. If you land really good on a guy and he immediately switches from standing directly in front of you to desperately circling away from you and covering his head, that's that. But striking or grappling that lead to visual injury, meaning swelling, hematomas, laceration, and bruising, which Garry certainly got that throughout this fight. Not in round 5, but throughout this fight, he did lots of damage of that ilk. Now, there were some potential headbutts involved that might have affected that, but that's immaterial to this video. So there's that. Grappling or submission attempts that hyperextend joints or cause rotational damage, and then additionally chokes that cause visible distress. Okay, now this will probably be a thing people are hinging on, I'd assume, is the idea that, Islam Machachev didn't have like full-blown submission attempts where he was like arm locking Garry and hyperextending his arm, or where he had rear naked choke attempts where Garry was actually getting strangled before he escaped. He didn't have full-blown attempts like that, which he did not. And they're going to say, ergo, none of his grappling counts as damage, right? Because Islam did hardly anything per the shit I just listed, right? He landed a few kind of shitty punches at the end of the fight, which, as I said, would outweigh the shitty punches Garry threw back at him, but would not outweigh the strikes that Garry landed on the feet, right? And in terms of the grappling, Islam didn't slam Garry on his head or something. He didn't, actually have a choke on where Garry was being strangled. He did not hyperextend or twist any joints with submission attempts in that sense. So yes, per this list, Garry did more damage. Moving on. At the bottom here, starting right this paragraph, it says, damage is the most highly valued component in judging a round because it is not an action but rather a direct result of effective fighting. Damage is a measure of effect on the opponent, the results of which lessen an opponent's capacity and or will to compete, and has immediate cumulative impact towards ending the match, with priority given to the immediate damage over cumulative damage within a round. So, meaning if it's a striking match and one guy is numerically outlanding the other, but the other lands the handful of big strikes that wobble the other guy, that the strikes that wobble count for more because they're immediate. They have an immediate potential to finish the fight, whereas the other guy is just winning on volume and could only hope to accumulatively, attritively break the guy down if he's ever to finish him. So regardless, yes, this is saying that damage is the most important thing. It's saying that of the 3 Ds, damage, duration, and dominance, damage is the most important. Okay? And as we'll see, damage still connects to the other two, but yes, it's correct that damage is the most important. However, it does not say that it's the only thing that gets prioritized, the only thing that gets assessed, that you only look at the other two if damage is totally neck and neck. Again, that is how you're supposed to look at controlling the fighting area and aggression, right? That only is supposed to be factored in at all whatsoever if the 3Ds are totally equal. If you can't discern, as I said, even a marginal advantage for one guy. It does not say that you're only supposed to look at dominance and duration if you're only able to discern, or if you're not even able, rather, to discern a marginal advantage for either guy. Okay? Because to be blunt, yes, damage, you know, from strikes and from the list of bullet points here of like things that are included in damage, yes, per this, Ian Garry did more damage. Only marginally. You know, you'd have to, like, literally nothing else would have to be factored in for you to score the fight for it, or the round for him because of it. That's how little the advantage was. That's how little real damage he did, right? But if that were literally the only thing you were looking at, and you said, we'll only consider other variables if damage is perfectly equal between both guys, if that's what it said, then yeah, Garry would win. That's not what it actually says, okay? It says damage is the most important, but it's not the only important thing, okay? All right, moving on. Dominance. Defined as supremacy of positioning, action, and or volume by one fighter over another for a sustained period of time. Mind you, over half a round worth of control on the back with the body triangle. It reflects an imposition or mastery of fighting skills and effectiveness of one fighter over another, leading to successful tactics and or strategic advantages, and note this language, intended to result in damage. Right? So damage is still, like, relevant. Again, it's the 3Ds connect to each other, and damage is sort of like omnipresent. But it doesn't say it has to lead to damage. It's successful tactics or strategic advantages intended to result in damage. Islam Machachev was trying to finish the fight. Islam Machachev wanted his fucking choke. All right, now I'm going to briefly side tangent here. All right, I'm going to cut back here. Part of this, again, I haven't watched anyone's videos, but I feel like you'd have to argue this if you're arguing that Islam isn't dominant per that language, that none of this was like intended to finish the fight or do damage. If you're arguing that, you have to be arguing, I think, that Islam only meant to hold the back, that he had no intention of getting the fucking choke. And I'm going to make the case to you that that is never true, basically. I mean, it's imaginable that someone would do that, but that's basically never the case, even in rounds like this, where I feel like people would say, oh, he's just holding on. In the fight, Islam Machachev has the back, and Garry is forced to constantly defend. He's forced to constantly hand fight. Okay? And, excuse me. And there are moments, of course, where Islam is trying to get over the chin or under the neck. Again, I listed them when I gave you my notes and timestamped everything. There's several points where he clearly, boom, like goes across the chin, and Garry has to defend. Garry is spending the whole time doing this and this to defend his throat. If Garry just went like this and just held his hands out and didn't hand fight and just left his chin up, Islam would instantly just go and submit him. Right? And that applies to other fights like this. I'm going to show footage here. All right, as you can see here, I have footage. I have the video pulled up from Islam Machachev versus Volkanovski 1, and this is from round 4. This is the round where Islam gets on his back and Volk is punching him, backwards, punching behind at him and gesturing that Islam's not doing anything. But you'll see here, even in that round, you'll see footage of Islam trying to get his fucking arm around Volk's chin and Volk having to defend it. Okay? See here? If Volk just gave up on hand fighting and put his chin up, like, he would get tapped. Islam would take it. All right? Similar fight. Or similar round, similar position. Aljamain Sterling in the rematch with Peter Yan. In rounds 2 and 3, he gets the body triangle for extended periods, but you'll see he's doing similar stuff. And he actually lands more punches in this fight than Islam was landing from that position. But you can see, again, he's putting his arm around the chin. Yan is tucking his chin and forced to hand fight. Okay, so that illustrates that, yeah, like if someone's on your back, you have to constantly be defending. You know, you need to constantly have your chin down and your shoulders shrugged, or your arm up, or your hands up like this, or be doing whatever to not just let them choke you. Because, yeah, if you just went like, yeah, okay, you're just holding. I don't think you're trying to finish me. You'd get choked, 100%. And you see that in the fight with Garry in round 5, in round 4 against Volk, Islam is doing that. Islam is trying to get that arm around, and he is forcing the guy to defend, just like Sterling was against Peter Yan. So, you know, is it conceivable that someone gets the back and literally has like no intention of finishing the guy? It's conceivable. I don't think that really ever happens. I think, yeah, some people are more assertively and aggressively like chasing the choke in the finish. You know, some people are making more of an effort. You know, some people are more comfortable knowing that, like, hey, even if I don't get the choke, I'm going to win this round. You know, they are more comfortable winning on points because of the position, but they're still like trying to choke the guy out, and the other guy has to defend the whole fucking time. That's what we see in these fights. That's what we see in round 5 between Islam and Garry. So that's that. All right, so again, as you can see here, intended to result in damage counts. So Islam being on your back and trying to choke you counts, okay? All right, anyways, and we're still in dominance here. This includes forcing the opponent to continually defend with no counters or reaction taken, even when openings present themselves. So I know that a lot of openings presented themselves because he's just, you know, stuck in this body triangle. But as far as forcing the opponent to continually defend, you know, with no counters, that is like what that is. That's what we're seeing. You know, that we saw like over half a round of that. All right, moving on. Staking a dominant grappling position and continuously forcing the opponent to defend potentially fight-ending submissions or attack. All right, bear that in mind. Note, in parentheses here, note that merely holding a dominant position or positions shall not be considered demonstrating dominance on the ground. Okay, so this is, again, I feel like if you were to argue that Islam shouldn't have won, you'd have to argue that in this section here, Islam is not continuously or at all forcing Garry to defend potentially fight-ending submissions or attacks, and that he's just holding the position. All right? So to make like an easier case, like, you know, like just holding someone in half guard where you're not setting up any chokes like Islam was doing against JDM quite a bit, like that you could say like doesn't count as dominance. Now, Islam still won that fight because Garry got like nothing fucking going whatsoever, and Islam still actually had some submission attempts when Garry would try to sit up and Islam would try to set up the Darce, but which aren't attempts probably in the sense that they're going to be listed on Fight Metric or UFC stats, but they are him attempting to submit the guy and the guy having to change what he's doing to not get submitted, right? So, but holding someone in half guard, if you're just sitting there, like, they're not defending anything. It's not like when you're on someone's back and they have to constantly protect their neck. You know, there's not some imminent threat of a choke that's constantly there that they have to constantly like keep the guard up against. Okay? And we saw not only is that like true in principle, not only in principle is your neck always a liability when someone's on your back, but we saw the hand fighting. We saw Islam trying to get his arm across or under the chin of Garry and Garry having to defend it. So yes, per this little second bullet point under duration, Islam is scoring. He is not merely holding a position. All right? All right, next bullet point. Maintaining an overwhelming offensive pace, you know, with any combination of legal strikes that continuously force the opposing fighter to consistently be in a defensive or reactive mode. Less so a pace thing, so that again, I feel like that would apply more in like something like a Marab fight, where he's just constantly on you and making you work and defend, even if he's not necessarily, like getting like good submission attempts or something or landing tons of punches. All right, so that's that. That's dominance. That's the second D dealt with. Duration. defined as a measure of the time or percentage of the round spent by one fighter successfully imposing effective technique, thereby establishing dominance and or administering damage. Okay? So, duration matters in so much as you're doing dominance and or administering damage. Okay? It doesn't say and, it says and or, meaning you could be doing one or the other and it would count. All right? Because again, we've established how you can be dominant by merely intending to do damage, and that duration counts if you establish for time dominance and or damage. Come on, buddy. Come on. Well, you get the idea. Dominance and or damage. Okay? And again, we've established that you don't only count damage. It's the most highly valued, as listed right here. It's not the only. It's one of, as listed here, 3 prioritized and interrelated constructs. See what I'm saying? So, per that, Islam Machachev overwhelmingly had whilst Ian Garry had a marginal edge in the damage department, Islam Machachev had a massive advantage in the dominance and duration departments. Okay? Because again, he spent over half the fucking round on the guy's back with the guy having to defend the choke. You know, he didn't get the choke on. You know, it's not like, as listed here in damage, chokes that cause visible distress, which as a side note is sort of a weird thing to put in there because chokes that cause visible distress don't damage you. Like, I get why the joint locks are in here because that actually damages. Whoops. God damn it. I see why this stuff is in here because that actually causes damage to the joints. It's just like that scumbag Corey Sandhagen when he's injuring people's knees and shit going for leg entanglements. Like, even though he didn't get the submission attempt did damage, right? Or you think of like, didn't Charles Oliveira get like a really tight arm bar on Tony Ferguson that clearly hyperextended his arm, but Tony didn't tap? Right? I'm remembering that correctly, I think. Like, I can see why that counts as damage, but why does the choke count as damage? Yeah? It should only in the sense that, like, it's potentially tiring the guy out, right? Because it's, like, stressful to defend the choke, and maybe your breath is, like, temporarily obstructed or something. But, and you, like, it got your adrenaline up and everything. Like, maybe it fatigued you slightly, but it's not really damage. So that's kind of weird. But yes, I get that didn't happen. Islam did not do this. Hold on. Islam did not do this right here that's highlighted. Chokes that cause visible distress. He did not do that to Ian Garry, but he was attempting to do those chokes, which again, right here, under dominance, intended to result in damage, counts. And as we said here, duration counts when it leads to the establishment of dominance and or administering damage. Not and, but and or. All right, so moving on, we're nearly done here. This is the best argument that the Garry advocates have on their side. The judging criteria, semicolon, effective fighting technique. Was that colon or a semicolon? I forget which is which. Judges will evaluate the relative effectiveness of each fighter's mixed martial arts techniques, such as successful striking and successful grappling. Now, successful grappling is defined as the execution of grappling skills proven productive by the damage resulting from takedowns, reversals, submission attempts, and achieving an advantageous position. Now, that's worded weird. You could say that grappling is only successful if it leads to damage by the wording of that, because it's proven productive by the damage resulting from the takedowns, reversals, submission attempts, and achieving advantage positions. That's not written in such a way that it seems necessarily that it should be read to say damage resulting from takedowns as its own thing, and then reversals, submission attempts, and achieving dominant positions as separate things. You could read it that way, but the way that's framed makes it sound like you're saying damage resulting from all these things. Maybe I'm wrong on the grammar there, but yeah, that kind of reads to me like they're trying to say you need to achieve damage from each of these things. But I'm going to say that interpretation doesn't jive with anything else we just read. So I'm going to assume that's not the intended meaning there. That grappling only is successful if it results in damage, not even intended damage, as said above under the dominant section, but damage full stop. Again, that seems inconsistent with the rest of this, but if you're going to argue that Garry won, I feel like your argument would have to hinge like overwhelmingly on this language right here. And I'm going to say, I think we're done. I think we're done reading. Because, now it goes into the effectiveness of all that, taking the 3Ds taking priority, and only if they're a tie do you defer to aggressiveness and fight area control. Okay, so that's the rules read. So I'm here to argue that the very marginal advantage of damage from Garry is outweighed by the scoring, dominance, and duration of Islam Makhachev, per that language. And yes, your only argument would be that they must not intend that to count as successful grappling, which would be weird based on all the other language, and based on like a sentence that has kind of multiple ways to read it. That would be strange. But as I indicated earlier, if you truly believe that, if you truly believe that that language, as I outlined it, and as I explained what happened in the round, is meant to tell you that Islam should have lost, that Garry should have gotten a 10-8 round in round 5, or a 10-9 round, in round 5, that it should have gone to him and he should have won a 3-2 decision. If that's your argument, then again, I feel like you should be really outraged about the fact that that's what the judging criteria ostensibly intends and says and means, right? Because in that scenario, grappling counts for basically nothing. The only grappling that scores at all is submission attempts that are on enough that you're either like strangling the person where you can see them choking. So think of like Mackenzie Dern at the end of round 1, I think it was, versus Jillian Robertson, where she had an actual choke on and, Robertson is having to pry it off her neck. Either that or, joint lock attempts or attacks that do actual damage by hyperextending or twisting the joints, like Oliveira did to Ferguson. That would be literally the only grappling that scores for anything. That and like slams that like concussively damage you or something. But that would be it. And at that point, like that's just insane. This is mixed martial arts. And yes, I don't want wall install to outweigh getting jabbed up or something like that. But to have what Garry did, the little that he did, in terms of the striking, outweigh all of that grappling that Islam did?
Absurdity.
That would be insane. That would be a scandal to me if that's what the actual criteria wanted from the fighters. There, again, like no grappling would be worth doing at that point. Like you'd only get any points for submission attempts that don't actually work, that don't actually win you the fight, that don't actually get the tap, but that do damage of some kind. And that's it. You could land ground and pound, but now you have to get position, land better strikes than the other guy's landing on the feet, right? Which is a tall order too. So it's like, that would be it. That would be the only grappling available to anyone. No one would grapple at that point. Like it'd be no fucking point. You could basically be like Ryan Hall and just bank on like leg locking everyone, or you could like really, really, really believe that you could land so much ground and pound that it's going to outweigh anything they do on the feet, like reliably, which a few people could do, and that's kind of it. And that's it. Like that would be your only path as a grappler. It would just encourage everyone to just strike. There'd be almost no point in trying to grapple. It's like in striking sports where punches to the head don't score for much, where like leg kicks and shit like that score for more, or kicks in general score for more. And it's like, why even throw punches? They score for so little. I just throw kicks. And that's bad. And that would be scandalous if that's what like the MMA scoring criteria was meant to be. And maybe the conspiracy theorists amongst you will say, like, that is what it's intended to, and that's part of Dana White's like long con to get the strikers to be more successful and get the Dagestanis out of here and blah 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 blah. If that were the case, then I think the judges would actually be towing the line a little bit. Because if that's the intention behind this criteria, the judges clearly aren't adhering to it. And I'm not saying MMA judges are the brightest bulbs in the fucking box, or that they always adhere to like the intention of their written criteria, but no one's scoring the fights these ways. And again, if it were intended to be scored this way, and that was some conspiracy to get the strikers to be more successful, I'd suspect the judges would be pressured to actually do it, right? If we're going to go that conspiracy route. But I'm going to instead assume that that's not the intention. I'm going to say that the interpretation I laid out is the intended way that this shit is supposed to be interpreted, and that's sensible because it wouldn't lead to insane outcomes like Garry winning this decision somehow. Okay, so I think that's all I've got on that. This has turned into a whole chore. I didn't want to make this video. I didn't think this was worth arguing about. I didn't think this was that interesting, and it was a pain in the ass to edit this shit and read through all that stuff and make that case. But here we are. So those are my thoughts on that. Let me know what you think down below. Like if you have not, subscribe if you have not, check out my other YouTube channel if you have not. I will link it down in the description box. It is called Michael Walsh Nerd Stuff. It is a nerd themed channel. On that channel, I talk about nerd shit. I talk about comic books, video games, anime, sci-fi, all that kind of stuff. If you're interested in that stuff, go check it out. If not, just stick around here. But in any case, take care.